Prospero burned. The wolves of Fenris fell it, and it blazed brightly, and died into the darkness. Though strong in many arts of war and lawfare, the Brotherhood of Tizca could not withstand the murder make. Bloody was the fighting, savage and unholy. Only one result was ever likely. No one survives the coming of the wolves, not even the Crimson King and his 1,000 sons. We know the conclusion. We know how it ends. We know that Magnus fled, broken, with the last surviving scraps of his once noble force, and, in fleeing, proved beyond any doubt the extent of his necromantic talents. Only the darkest magics allowed him to escape the field of war alive. There is one part of the account you do not know. However, it is my part, and I will tell it once, here and now. No conflict in the history of humanity would ever eclipse the bloodshed wrought from the civil war of the War Master of Chaos. Brother fought brother, and billions of souls across hundreds of worlds cried out for salvation as the guns of the traitor legions carved a swathe through the once proud bastions of the Imperium. Yet such a violent conflict required a catalyst to spark the flame of heresies to come, for no act of rebellion can take flight without the shadow of vindication shrouding its deeds. For today, we shall elucidate the first battle of the Horus Heresy, which sparked the chain of events leading to the ruination of an empire. The cull of the Crimson King's fiefdom, the burning of Prospero.
Such arrogant certainty. How pleasing that is to me. All the very worst sins are accomplished with such certainty. Gluttony, wrath, lust, pride. No force in existence can compete with mortals in the grip of certainty.
Of all the Primarchs of the Imperium, none bore more natural talent and potential in the arts of harnessing the Immaterium than Magnus the Red. Raised upon the world of Prospero, his new homeworld embraced psychic mutations openly and fostered a civilization keen to unravel the mysteries of the Warp. Adopted by the scholars of the planet and maturing to become the ruler of its people, the Crimson King of Prospero, when reunited with the Emperor, displayed immense mastery of the arcane arts of his people. Revealing the secrets of the Immaterium to his gene-son, the Master of Mankind forewarned Magnus never to delve into the depths of the occult lore within its tides, to prevent his corruption by its malevolent influence. Installed as the leader of his genetic descendants, the 15th Legion, the Crimson King fostered their proclivity to emulate his own psychic mastery, and regardless of his father's warnings, studied the fell sorceries within the depths of the Warp. The 1,000 Sons were a cut above their peers in their mastery of psychic potential, yet as they continued to explore their capabilities, a curse befell their legion. Dubbed the Flesh Change, horrific mutations ran rampant within their ranks, with no obvious signs for its cause or exacerbation. Seeking answers from within the tides of the great ocean, Magnus petitioned aid from the denizens which claimed the Immaterium as their domain. Sacrificing his eye in exchange for a means to cure his gene-sons, the Cyclops of Prospero returned to his legion to find their affliction cured by his bargain with the beings of the Warp. Unknowingly agreeing to a pact with the Changer of Ways, Tzeentch, the naive actions of the Crimson King would in time only worsen the plight of his legion. Disregarding the Emperor's warnings, Magnus's insatiable hunger for knowledge drove him to plunge deeper into the great ocean, his immense power and mastery of the arcane arts blinding him to its myriad dangers. Teaching his gene-sons the fell arcanum gleaned from the Warp. As the Great Crusade wore on, rumors of forbidden sorceries conducted within the Legiones Astartes began to spread. Primarchs such as Leman Russ, Mortarion, and Corvus Corax balked at the methods used by the Crimson King and began to foster discontent with his actions, often refusing to fight alongside his legion during their campaigns. Meanwhile, stalwart kinsmen such as the Primarchs Sanguinius and Jaghatai Khan grew close to their brother and shared his belief that the Psykers of the legions were a boon to their campaigns, waged across the stars. Foreseeing reprisal by his brothers, who displayed contempt for such witchcraft, the Great Angel, Warhawk, and Crimson King outlined the Space Marines Librarius in order to codify and outline the safe use of such supernatural powers. Magnus saw no danger in the use of the Immaterium, whilst Jaghatai suggested restraint, and between the two, Sanguinius stood as a middle ground. Between them, drafting the outlines and laws which would train and develop the Librarian Order of the Astartes. Submitting their organizational outlines to the Emperor for approval, the Master of Mankind sanctioned the Librarian Order within the Legiones Astartes to better control the psychically gifted members of the Angels of Death. Proving themselves to be exceptional warriors, the Librarians of the Astartes became widespread within the legions, with only a few exceptions, such as the Death Guard, refusing to recruit them into their ranks. For despite the best efforts of the founders of the Librarius, the threat of Psykers would soon once again be brought into question.
"Magnus, enough!" barked Lorgar. "This is not the time for such debate. 2 of my dearest brothers are at each other's throats, and it grieves me to know how this shall disappoint our father. Is this what he created us for? Is this why he scoured the heavens looking for us? So we could descend into petty bickering like mortals? We have greater destinies before us, and must be above such lesser concerns. We are our father's avatars of conquest, fiery comets of righteousness set loose to illuminate the cosmos with his glory. We are his emissaries, sent out into the galaxy to bear word of his coming. We must be bright, shining examples of all that is good and pure in the Imperium."
Lorgar's words reached out to all who heard them, the fundamental truth they contained, like a soothing balm. Ahriman was ashamed they had allowed things to spin so violently out of control, seeing the true horror of this situation, brother against brother. Could there be anything worse? As the Great Crusade waged, the Thousand Sons, now imbued with arcane knowledge, brought countless worlds into compliance. Though among the smallest legions of the Astartes, each and every warrior within their ranks bore psychic potential in excess of their peers, with even the most ungifted of their number comparable to the most capable of their cousin legions. Able to bring otherworldly might to bear with only a fraction of their number, the enemies of the Imperium more often than not would surrender at the sight of such ceramite-clad warriors, casting volleys of flame, lightning, and other elemental abilities. Capable of controlling the minds of the weak-willed, and guarding their lines from conventional arms with telekinetic barriers, there was little hope for a mere mortal to slay but a single one of these strange warriors. Yet upon the world of Aguru, the fate of the Thousand Sons would forever be changed. Waging the Aguru campaign alongside the Space Wolves Legion in joint compliance, though much of the world submit due to the diplomatic efforts of the 15th, a more nefarious threat proved more difficult to pacify. Beings known to the populace as Elohim infested the subterranean passages of the peaks of the large mountain range of the planet, requiring force of arms to destroy. Alongside a detachment of the Rout, commanded by Umlodi Skarsenson of the 5th Great Company, the Thousand Sons fought warp beings of Slanesh, regarded by the Aguru as Daestai, the Astartes discovering strange dead stones surrounding the mountain peak, which dulled the senses of psychically gifted individuals. Investigating the tomb of the Daesai, Magnus the Red discovered a strange network of conceptual conduits spanning billions of pathways connected to countless worlds. Shown visions of his homeworld burned to ashes by a demon of the warp, Magnus sealed the link of Aguru and awoke strange Titan-like guardians within the mountain peak. Combating the millennia slumbered guardians of the mountain and possessed chieftain of the Aguru tribes, the 6th and 5th legions slew the demons of the warp, ignorant of their true nature. With Agoru brought into the compliance of the 15th Legion, they would subsequently join forces with the full might of the 6th and 17th Legion within the Arc Reach cluster, in order to bring the human populace known as the Evanians, led by their so-called Phoenix Court, into the fold of the Imperium. For 6 months, the Free Legions pacified the Arc Reach cluster, until their efforts culminated on the world of Heliosa. Slaughtering the Evanians, tensions began to build between the Thousand Sons and Space Wolves, the Crimson King disgusted by the genocidal actions of the Rout within the Battle of Phoenix Crag. Seeking to protect the civilians' repository of information within their great library, Primarch Leman Russ declared that such fell texts must be put to the torch. Charging the Thousand Sons, defending the library, the ensuing brawl saw to the death of several Fenrisian wolves by use of the 15th Legion's psychic powers. Hastar of the Pavoni cult succumbed to the flesh change during the melee and sowed panic throughout the assembled ranks of the Thousand Sons. Executed by the Wolf King, Hastar's transformation brought to light the flaw within the 15th Legion and realization to the Crimson King that his pact with the beings of the Great Ocean no longer held true. Disgusted at the mutation wrought by the fallen Astartes, Leman Russ resolved to kill the Thousand Sons where they stood, yet would relent with the timely intervention of the Wordbearers Legion's Primarch, Lorgar Aurelian. Swearing an oath to settle their score at a later day, the Wolf King ordered his men to fall back from the planet and distance themselves from their tainted cousins. For the wrath of the Great Wolf had already seen to the extinction of a legion, redacted from Imperial history, and should Magnus not act carefully, his own men would be added to his bloody tally.
Hear now the words of my ruling. I am not blind to the needs of the Imperium, but nor am I blind to the realities of the hearts of men. I hear men speak of knowledge and power, as though they are abstract concepts to be employed as simply as a sword or gun. They are not. Power is a living force, and the danger with power is obsession. A man who attains a measure of power will find it comes to dominate his life, until all he can think of is the acquisition of more. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but few can stand the ultimate test of character, that of wielding power without succumbing to its dark temptations. Peering into the darkness to gain knowledge of the warp is fraught with peril, for it is an inconstant place of shifting reality, capricious lies, and untruths. The seeker after truth must have a care he is not deceived, for false knowledge is far more dangerous than ignorance. All men wish to possess knowledge, but few are willing to pay the price. Always men will seek to take the shortcut, the quick route to power, and it is a man's own mind, not his enemy or foe, that will lure him to evil ways. True knowledge is gained only after the acquisition of wisdom. Without wisdom, a powerful person does not become more powerful, he becomes reckless. His power will turn on him, and eventually destroy all he has built. I have walked paths no man can know, and faced the unnameable creatures of the warp. I understand all too well the secrets and dangers that lurk in its hidden darkness. Such things are not for lesser minds to know, no matter how powerful or knowledgeable they believe themselves to be. The secrets I have shared serve as warnings, not enticements to explore further. Only death and damnation await those who pry too deeply into secrets not meant for mortals. I see now I have allowed my sons to delve too profoundly into matters I should have never permitted them to know even existed. Let it be known that no one shall suffer censure, for this conclave is to serve unity, not discord. But no more shall the threat of sorcery be allowed to taint the warriors of the Astartes. Henceforth, it is my will that no legion will maintain a librarius department. All its warriors and instructors must be returned to their battle companies, and never again employ any psychic powers. Woe betide he who ignores my warning, or breaks faith with me. He shall be my enemy, and I will visit such destruction upon him and all his followers that, until the end of all things, he shall rue the day he turned from my light.
Psychic powers had proven crucial to progressing the Great Crusade with haste, yet the harnessing of the Immaterium was not without risk. Tyrants aplenty had wielded such power to mold the galaxy in their image, and even the incidence of psychic mutations within the 15th proved to be dangerous to ignore. Though the installation of the Librarius within the legions, thanks to the efforts of the Crimson King, Great Angel and Warhawk, had made strides in harnessing such abilities effectively, many still derided the witch breed of the Astartes. Convening a council upon the frontier world of Nicaea, the Master of Mankind petitioned champions and detractors of their use from within the Legiones Astartes to plead their case. Magnus, as the most powerful Psyker in the Imperium, with exception given to the Master of Mankind, championed his cause, proposing that such a potent energy could never be eschewed for the betterment of humanity. Citing the use of navigators and astropaths to be crucial to the prosperity of the Imperium, the Crimson King saw no reason why the Astartes must be constrained by their use of the warp. Warriors such as the Chief Stormseer of the White Scars, Targutai Yasugai, proclaimed that such powers were a boon to the Great Crusade, the wise Dragoran regardless advising restraint when utilizing such unnatural powers. Opposing the motion to retain the Librarius stood the Primarch Mortarion, his youth tormented by the necromancer overlords of Barbarus, fueling his hatred for all use of sorcery. Alongside him stood the rune priest Ophir Weirdmake, whose camaraderie with the Thousand Sons chief librarian, Arzek Araman, had been a ruse to fully observe his legion's use of the Immaterium. Believing his own abilities to be drawn not from the warp, but the raw essence of his homeworld of Fenris, Ophir derided all librarians outside the bounds of the Vilca Fenrica as untrustworthy and dangerous sorcerers. Though the librarians had proven effective in supplementing the force of arms wielded by the Legiones Astartes, the evidence brought to bear of the Thousand Sons' mutations and employment of occult practices outside the strictures of the Librarius could not be ignored. Disbanding the Librarius in order to prevent their corruption by the as of now largely unknown denizens of the Warp, the Master of Mankind could not allow their fell influence to twist his subjects against his grand vision. The Emperor's trust placed in Magnus never to disobey his tenets to study the forbidden arts of the Immaterium had been broken, and now the cost to his legion would be dear. Characterized solely for their expertise as librarians, the Thousand Sons, now stripped of their Librarius, had lost not only power, but their very identity as warriors. Navigators and astropaths would remain closely scrutinized, yet all legionaries of the Astartes bearing psychic potential must eschew their psychic hoods and find new purpose as line soldiers within their ranks. Establishing the Order of Chaplains within the legions to monitor for breaches of the decree and oversee the purity of their men, little would any realize the importance of this new creed to the future of the Space Marines. Ordering Magnus to return to his homeworld and reorganize his legion, the Emperor imparted a severe warning to the Crimson King.
If you treat with the warp, Magnus, I shall visit destruction upon you, and your legion's name will be struck from the Imperial records for all time. The war is over, Diocletian. Win or lose, Horus has damned us all. Mankind will share in his ignorance until the last man or woman draws the species' last breath. The warp will forever be a cancer in the heart of all humans. The Imperium may last 100 years, or 1,000, or 10,000, but it will fall, Diocletian. It will fall. The shining path is lost to us. Now we rage against the dying of the light.
As the Crimson King reflected upon the decree of Nicaea, bitterness and anger stirred within his soul. What was a master of the arcane without arcana, nor a scholar without tomes, nor a philosopher without thought. The Thousand Sons were rudderless in an endless sea, their cessation of studying the Immaterium halting their insatiable drive to empower humanity through understanding of the warp and its mysteries. On pain of death, they must resist the urge to scry into the skeins of fate. Yet unbeknownst to the Thousand Sons, a chance to save the Imperium from disaster would prove all too tempting to resist. In secret, the Crimson King continued to study the Immaterium, for in his mind he was above all rulings for lesser men. He was a Primarch, a son of the Master of Mankind himself, and not to comply with such commandments, even should they be imparted by his own father. Persuading his most trusted advisors within the Legion to join in his collusion, the Crimson King called all his disparate forces to regroup upon Prospero. Though small fragments of the Legion, such as Captain Menace Calliston's Fourth Fellowship, were too far to reach their homeworld, the majority of the 15th Legion garrisoned their homeworld and were in position for the first great gambit of the Ruinous Powers. Horus Lupercal, War Master of the Imperium and Primarch of the Sons of Horus, had begun his fall to chaos on the feral world of Darwin. Within the Temple of the Serpent Lodge, First Chaplain Erebus of the Wordbearers enacted his fallen legion's plot to infect the mind of the Lupercal to facilitate their own schemes. Imbued with the influence of the Ruinous Powers, the first War Master of Chaos ascended and began to put in motion his plans to overthrow the Imperium and crown himself as the ruler of humanity. Within his meditations, Magnus foresaw the pact made between the Lupercal and Pantheon of Chaos, his attempts to sway his brother from damnation failing. Foreseeing the fall of the Imperium and deaths of his brothers, the visions imparted to the Crimson King had been removed of his own actions and inferred that only he could prevent disaster. Gathering his cabal of sorcerers, the Crimson King attempted to warn the Emperor upon Terra by projecting his psychic presence within the Imperial Palace's throne room. The astropathic choirs were too unreliable to risk his message being lost or corrupted, and so Magnus the Red propelled his essence across the galaxy until being blocked from the palace's interior. Observing a vast warding hex shield enclosing the Imperial Palace, a strange presence of the warp offered the Cyclops of Prospero a means to breach the barrier in order to aid him in warning the Emperor. Naively accepting the poison chalice of the Ruinous Powers, Magnus tore a rend through the warp barrier and lanced his message into the mind of the Emperor. Filling the Master of Mankind's psyche with visions of the impending betrayal, the actions of Magnus the Red irreparably damaged the Emperor's secret webway project and flooded demons of the warp into the Imperial webway. Humanity's one chance to replace warp travel by utilizing the Eldar's navigation system was ruined as demonic entities spewed forth into the heart of the Imperial Palace, requiring every able-bodied custodian to charge into the breach and stem the tide of chaos. Magnus had damned humanity forevermore, his actions irreparably turning the tide of the impending war and removing the Emperor and his Golden Host from combating the traitor forces. The Crimson King had broken his vow to the Emperor never to dabble within the Immaterium, and now would suffer the consequences of his actions.
I was on Prospero, brothers. I was there when we burned their heresy from the galaxy. I saw Leman Russ lay waste to their cherished places. I saw traitors weep from corrupted eyes as we turned their pyramids of glass into barren wasteland.
Furious with his wayward son's actions, the Master of Mankind ordered his most loyal son to bring the 15th to justice. Believing his warning of the War Master's betrayal to be a ruse concocted by the Ruinous Powers, the Emperor called upon the Wolf King of Fenris to bring Magnus to Terra to be judged for his crimes. Dispatching a portion of the Custodian Guard and Sisters of Silence to meet with the 6th Legion, an astropathic message would be transmitted to Leman Russ. Intercepting the orders from the Emperor, Horus Lupercal now under the thrall of the ruinous powers, manipulated his father's commands before their traversal to the fleet of the Vilka Fenrika. Receiving orders to exterminate the Thousand Sons, the Wolf King's grudge required little stoking to flare, and so it was that the Rout prosecuted their invasion with no restraint. Attempting to contact Magnus with an offer to surrender, with no response from the Primarch of the 15th, a peaceful response was beyond all hope. Assembling at the world of Thardia, the Rout gathered reinforcements from the Legio Custodes, Legio Mortis, and Black Ships of the Silent Sisterhood. The obscene might of such martial warriors combined, unheard of since the most desperate conflicts waged of the Great Crusade. The Custodians and Space Wolves would purge the wicked with support of the Pariahs, for this battle would be the first recorded instance of Astartes killing those of their own creed. The Thousand Sons, though caught off guard, were still angels of death, and would have every advantage typical of a force defending its own homeworld. As the wolves advanced, the Crimson King began to understand the folly of his actions. His manipulations by the Changer of Ways evidently damning not only himself and his legion, but humanity entire to decay and destruction. Inconsolable and seeking repentance, the Crimson King used his psychic might to obscure the impending fleet headed for Prospero, willing to sacrifice his men, his citizens, and fiefdom should they act as a worthy sacrifice to prevent further catastrophe. Ordering his fleet to disperse far from Prospero, the Crimson King awaited the judgment of the Rout and refused to submit to the enticements of the Chaos entity, Tzeentch. Confronted by the captain of the Fifth Fellowship, Balek Ufizar, the master of the Athenaean cult demanded answers as to why his Primarch had refused to warn his people of the imminent invasion. Destroying Ufizar and his men with a blast of his psychic might, many loyal sons of the 15th would suffer a similar fate this day. Those who saw signs of the imminent threat were wiped of their memories as they stumbled aimlessly through the defense arrays and streets of Tizca, their minds sterilized by the Crimson King from afar. Boarding escaping vessels in orbit, none escaped the wrath of the Rout as blockades surrounded Prospero, slaying any hoping to escape the Emperor's judgment. Rune Priest interrogated civilians fleeing the planet, imparting intel learned to their commanders prior to their purge. Harafnakel, flagship of Leman Russ and the Space Wolves Armada, bombarded the planet from orbit. Its choir of guns echoed by the remainder of the fleet as their payload saturated the planet and tore down its grandiose cities. The Raptora cult on the surface erected a kind shield to protect their capital, Tizca, from the devastation raining from the heavens as the wider planet turned to ash. As the Rout descended from the heavens, it would not take long before their blades and bolters laid waste to the beautiful vistas of the City of Light. Taking up arms as they desperately fought to defend themselves, the Thousand Sons were butchered like cattle as warriors clad in grey and gold tore through their ranks. Already hampered in their ability to use warp powers, the Thousand Sons, when pitted against the Silent Sisterhood, stood little chance of survival, their very physiques drained by the mere presence of the warriors of Luna. The planet's defenses stood silent, no gun batteries nor air support, taking aim at the unopposed drop pods and landing craft, unleashing the wrathful killers of Fenris. The Wolf King stood at the side of the Emperor's spear, the blades of Mjolnir and the Apollonian spear, sundering countless Prosperans. Grey Stormbirds dropped salvos of missiles through the streets before deploying landing skids in the wake of their destruction. The Wolf King led the charge to the city's port, securing all means of escape as the Spire Guard of Prospero desperately fought to slow their advance, commanded by the Corvidae cult. The southwest quadrant of the city of Tizca, fortified by the Prospero Assault Pioneers and Palatine Guard defending the Nephrati district under the command of Caton Athea, were assigned to positions which against any other foe could be described as a textbook example of military brilliance. In the span of less than 2 minutes, the Wolf King's forces overran their position, for the fury of the Rout could never be stalled by mortal men. No man nor beast could best the Wolf King. No tribe could stand against his armies. Within Russ's kingdom, a truce existed between man and wolf. His court was attended by the fiercest of warlords and the most beautiful of maidens. The Spire Guard had all but been routed, and all that stood between the Space Wolves and the destruction of Tizca were the Thousand Sons. Forming a perimeter around the 6 pyramids of Tizca, the Thousand Sons made their defiant last stand. Having incurred severe losses within mere minutes of the invasion, the approximate remaining 1,500 Astartes of the Thousand Sons played to the weaknesses of their foes. Knowing their skills with blades to be inferior to their opponents, who outnumbered them 3-1, contingents of the 15 began to set up sniping positions in order to pick off their enemies from afar. When not in range of the pariahs of the Sisterhood, savants of the Legion drew power from the warp to support their frontline kinsmen with kinetic shields and forbidden black sorceries. Becoming that which they had denied for so long in that moment, the renegade warlocks of the 15th attempted to change the battle in their favor. Inviting further reinforcement of the Silent Sisterhood to support the forward assault, the magics of the Thousand Sons dissipated no sooner than they had been unleashed. Choking on their incantations and witnessing their bodies mutate into claws and twisted appendages, the actions of the 15th Legion caused their gene curse to run rampant. Unleashing Space Wolves, overcome with their gene flaw of the Canis Helix, the transformed Wolfen hunted those that fled, their savage claws and teeth tearing through ceramite with ease. Retreating to the Pyramid of Photep, those Thousand Sons not tainted by the flesh change defended the lair of the Crimson King as he wallowed in self-pity. The Wolf King howled in triumph as his men surrounded the last bastion of Prospero. Soon the battle would be over, with the death of the Primarch of the 15th. Upon hearing the feral cries of the Wolfen, the Crimson King could no longer stand idle. Striding down the steps of his throne room and clad in golden artificer armor, the King of Prospero fought beside his Gene Sons. Ablaze with psychic energy, Magnus the Red cast warp lightning into the hordes of enemies besieging the Pyramid of Photep, its thunderous arcs detonating the armored vehicles of the rout and disintegrating Astartes. Many who looked into his seeing eye died instantly, the depths of Stygian power within too much to bear. As Magnus slowed the passage of time with his manipulations of the laws of nature, he commanded First Captain Ahriman to lead his surviving men to the safety of the pyramid. Activating the Jade Scarab pendant bequeathed by Magnus's equerry, Ammon, Ahriman realized that every Astartes of the Thousand Sons bore a similar crystal hewn from the reflecting caves of Prospero, and could be used to harness their combined psychic essence. Bequeathed the tome of collected knowledge of the Thousand Sons, the Book of Magnus, the surviving senior officers Ammon, Sobek, Hathor Mart, and Arzek Ahriman understood that the Crimson King intended to lay down his life in order for his people to escape. In the shadow of the Pyramid of Photep, a clash of kings began, the fate of Prospero hanging in the balance as the sons of the Emperor dueled. Mjolnir, the sword of Baal Knight, struck the blade of An-Ninurta, every psychic magic cast by the Crimson King shrugged off by the constitution of the barbarian king of Fenris. Cracking Russ's breastplate with a strike of his fist, the fragments of ceramite stabbed into the heart of the Great Wolf. Leman shattered Magnus's arm as reprisal, with Magnus forming a blade of psychic energy in his free hand and plunging its edge into the Wolf King's vulnerable chest wound. The wolves of Russ, Geri, and Freki left upon the Crimson King, their jaws clamping upon his legs, the Cyclops breaking the Black Wolf's skull with a strike of his fist and hurling the White Wolf with a telekinetic blast. Striking Magnus's eye with his blade, as the Crimson King reeled, Leman barreled into him and raised his body high into the air. Breaking Magnus's spine across his knee, the crack of his bone sent shudders through the assembled Astartes within the Pyramid of Photep. Triumphant over his brother, the Wolf King howled and raised Mjolnir high to enact the killing blow. Whispering words of power and pledging his service to the Changer of Ways, Magnus escaped the final judgment of the Bale Knight's Edge, his body dissipating as the God of Change claimed him for his own. Arzek Ahriman clutched the jade scarab on his chest, the sacrificed power of Magnus the Red transporting the remaining Thousand Sons in their City of Light into the depths of the Eye of Terror. Rematerializing upon the demon world of Sortiarius, the 15th Legion established their new base of operations, the Planet of the Sorcerers, and escaped their fate alike to the extinction of the 2nd and 11th Legions. For despite all their proclamations of innocence, the Thousand Sons had submit their souls to the ruinous powers, and would not find vindication as they tread the path ahead. History will say that they unleashed wolves of Russ on us, but history will be wrong. They unleashed something far worse. The casualties incurred upon the world of Prospero were staggering. Over 9,000 Thousand Sons had perished. The censure host of the Emperor had lost 49,000 warriors in total, including 23,000 space wolves and over 30 million Prosperine citizens. Custodians and Sisters of Silence had been slain, and though reprisal had been enacted by the Imperium for the sins of the 15th Legion, the Crimson King and his men had submit themselves to a new threat beginning to spread its malign influence. Magnus had ascended as the first demon prince and champion of the Changer of Ways, for his schemes and descent into madness had only just begun. Arzek Ahriman would in time attempt to salvage the remainder of his legion from their accursed flesh change, yet in seeking to salve a wound inflicted by the warp by using its own essence, continue to condemn his kinsmen to further suffering. Imperial records hereafter would tally the death toll of civilians as 0, for such was the shame of this needless act of bloodshed that even the Wolf King of Fenris felt shame for the genocide of Prospero. Horus's rebellion had begun in earnest, for without the action of his own legion, the Emperor's executioners had been bloodied and bruised, their cause found false due to his own manipulations. Scattered loyalist Thousand Sons, such as the 2,000 Ninth Fellowship Astartes under the command of Centaur Rame, were purged by the Ultramarines. Elements of the 7th Fellowship were abandoned following the assault of Mactor 7 by the Imperial Fists, whilst orphan sons of the 6th Fellowship found sanctuary within the Forge World of Zau Akkad. The duplicity of the War Master of Chaos remained unknown to the wider Imperium, and as the Space Wolves licked their wounds, several more atrocities began to spring into motion across the stars. The Thousand Sons were the greatest psychers within the Legiones Astartes, and the Vilca Fenrica its greatest headsman, and both had been diminished before the outbreak of heresy. Those that remained of the 15th Legion inevitably sided with the traitor rebellion, their bitterness and hunger for vengeance only satiable with the death of the Emperor and his Imperium. Whilst the rout was not by any means defeated, their forces had been harried and pride wounded, for even the Wolf King began to doubt his resolve and duty to the throne. Their armaments and munitions severely depleted, with the birth of the Ruin Storm in subsequent years, the rout would be cut off from supply lines, diminishing their effectiveness in the civil war to come. Yet the Vilca Fenrica were by no means declawed, and as the flames of heresy continued to spread, they would seek any and all opportunities to absolve themselves of the shame of their actions.
Do you remember what you said to me, brother? Do you remember what you said to me as we fought before the Pyramid of Photep? Do you remember the words you used? I do. As I recall, your face was tortured. Imagine that, the Master of the Wolves, his ferocity twisted into grief, and yet you still carried out your duty. You always did what was asked of you, so loyal, so tenacious. Truly, you were the attack dog of the Emperor. You took no pleasure in what you did. I knew that then, and know it now. But all things change. My brother.
This has been a tale of the great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. Prospero's destruction serves as an example of the folly of misplaced anger. Manipulated to the benefit of malevolent schemers of the ruinous powers, the Rout shall never forget the scars to their legacy made during the desolation of Prospero. Rage and zeal are not traits without purpose, yet are easily exploited by cooler heads, and as such must be countered by restraint. For no emotion is inherently detrimental, but must be acted upon sparingly and with foresight of their consequences.